Darkcast Network. Come to the dark side of podcasts. We have cookies.
Cookies? Me love cookies.
Hi guys, I'm Courtney.
And I'm Lisa.
And we are the hosts of The Book of the Dead, a true crime podcast based out of New Jersey, where we tell you about the most obscure cases that you may have never heard of. So join us in the Book of the Dead library for another chapter of the Book of the Dead wherever you get your podcasts. Bye guys.
On his way, devil is on his way, devil is on his way, motherfucker, the devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way, fall to your knees, devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees, devil is on his way, motherfucker, he's on his
Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
You know, Dylan, I can just look at your face and know that you're on one today.
Yeah.
And that you are going to get on my fucking nerves. And we haven't even started.
Well, you know, I think that is actually what endears us to the public. Me getting on your fucking nerves.
You think so?
But I do feel like I might get on your nerves.
Yeah, I can already tell. I can see your face. You're over there like dancing in your seat. You're wearing these obnoxiously short shorts.
Yeah, you like that?
And they're like a salmon color. Like, what is this? And you're manspreading in the chair. You're like giving me a full view. I can see your balls.
This is visual ASMR.
This is very unappealing. Okay, it's not very appetizing. I'm just gonna say.
Here, let me squish my legs together.
Again, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
All right.
You could not ask for more, not even if you were Edwin McCain.
Okay, here we are. It is a gloomy day. Oh my gosh.
It's a rainy day and a Monday.
Damn.
They always get me down. And the worst part is, I woke up this morning, was completely out of coffee, so I have not had coffee all day. And it's so gloomy out.
All you wanted was coffee.
Yeah, now I just feel like in this state of funk or something.
This reminds me or makes me think back to all those times you left like a half a cup of coffee got poured out.
It's because I have ADD and I forget like where I put the coffee.
Well, look, when we get done, I promise you, we'll go get you a coffee, okay?
You will?
Yeah.
Are you going to take me on a date and court me with a cup of coffee?
Yeah, I'll just get you some caffeine.
You going to wear those shorts?
Of course.
Okay. Great. Dylan, we have part 2 of the Kelly Tenia's case.
I can't wait. This was
such
such a crazy story.
What? Just wait, because it gets even more intense. The reason I made this a 2-parter is because there is so much information, and some of it I think will blow your mind.
Okay.
All right. So when we last left you, both brothers, John Jay and Robert, were listed as suspects by detectives. John Jay had a reputation in the neighborhood for being, quote, a leech. He was always hanging out where he wasn't wanted. Some of his behavior was very off-putting. Jay, I call him JJ, was known to bully younger kids in the neighborhood. Months before the murder, he had handcuffed a child to the garage door as a joke.
Well, that's not funny.
John Jay displayed knives and a hunting bow on his bedroom walls. Neighborhood kids said Robert had brandished the bayonet for them. He seemed to have a fondness for this particular weapon. At some point, John Jay had bragged to friends about killing a dog with the bayonet.
What? I mean, I think most of us has known a kid kind of like this, but that seems a bit extreme, right?
It does. A lot of the neighbors did not want their children hanging out with these boys. They did not allow their kids to enter into the Golub house.
Right.
Because of the reputation these two boys had.
And it's the very reason her family had lived directly next door, but didn't really know him, right? You think?
Right. During blood tests, investigators learned there were 2 types found on the attaché case and on a tablecloth. Finally, it was determined that Robert Golub had left the bloody handprint at the murder scene. If you remember, it was on the molding.
Right, and it got smeared in transport after they took the evidence, right?
It matched 12 points, which was more than required for legal determination. Yet to be sure, the local forensics lab wanted to send it to the FBI in Washington, D.C., just to confirm that it was legitimately Robert's handprint. It was determined without question that the handprint did belong to Robert Golub. By now, John Golub was ordering his sons to stop cooperating and told the media that his boys were innocent. He insisted someone else had snuck into the basement and murdered, quote, that girl. When the handprint matched Robert, John reacted as if police had manufactured the evidence. The media ran stories about the condition inside the Golub household. The boys were known to be regular drug users. Robert's door had been removed and a sheet was placed over the doorway due to his problematic behavior. So that, of course, became a bit of a gossip piece among neighbors.
Right, he's got a sheet for a door.
Elizabeth had bought items at yard sales, packing them into the house, which we discussed. Her husband said she wasn't a hoarder, she was a collector who could not pass up a bargain.
Who collects a bunch of different stuff.
Yes. The Golub house became known as the Death House. Teenagers cruised Horton Road hoping to catch a glimpse of the Golub family. Neighbors stood on their lawns staring at the house or gathered on the sidewalks trying to reckon with the enormity of what had taken place there. This does not surprise me. I believe if any of us had a horrific murder like this take place in our neighborhood, perhaps across the street, I think a lot of people would be dismayed and probably would stand around staring at the house.
Well, yeah.
Just trying to reconcile that this was real life.
Well, just knowing that something that brutal happened to a teenage girl just, literally next door would be disturbing for many people.
Since graduating from high school, Robert had made no new friends. He held a job as a delivery man for a brief time, but he racked up so many parking tickets and speeding tickets that he lost his driver's license. Robert was a bodybuilder who used steroids. Others in his gym circle referred to him as a juice addict.
Oh, so even the other meatheads thought he went a little far.
He spent 3 hours a day lifting weights. Otherwise, Robert lazed about the house, reading muscle magazines and graphic pornography. Both needles and drugs were discovered in his bedroom. Robert was known for his violent temper. In 1987, after placing 5th in a bodybuilding competition, Robert smashed the trophy. He was kicked out of the event, banned from competing in any future events. Robert refused to work at his father's gas station. His father said he didn't like to get his hands dirty.
So he's roid raging all over everybody. But it's kind of funny for someone to train that intensely, but then be lazy in all other aspects of their life.
A friend confirmed that Robert had been using crack cocaine and would drink up to 12 beers a day. All opinions seemed to be that Robert was a loser, mooching off his parents while his friends had gone off to college or had jobs. He didn't have a job or a driver's license. He spent his days sleeping, lifting weights, and using drugs. Unfortunately, investigators had not given Robert a blood test to determine if he had steroids in his system on the day Kelly's body was discovered. It was known that steroid users could fly into rages. Perhaps Robert had been using drugs when he attacked Kelly. Unless he confessed, detectives had no way of knowing. In Robert's room, violent pornographic videotapes were discovered, one of which ended with a woman being covered in blood and murdered.
My God.
So it was like a faux snuff film.
Yeah, that's very strange. That's way beyond, checking out a little porn here and there.
Who wants to watch that?
I guess.
I mean, that's the part that I don't understand is like, who watches this for pleasure?
I guess Robert.
It's pretty gross. I mean, you can watch some weird shit, but this goes a little beyond for me. Since DNA was in its early stages, the blood samples found in the basement could belong to either brother. John and Elizabeth were ruled out. However, there were genetic markers or an EAP used in the PGM test. Robert tested as a CA, which meant the samples matched, which these are like DNA terms that I don't really know.
Well, yeah, so it's very vague matches, though. It's not like 1 in a million. It sounds like it's more, just kind of narrows it down. It's not an exact science at this point.
Well, we'll get to this later. DNA will come up later in the story, Dylan. But here's what I can tell you. With DNA being so new, the district attorney was concerned about making a case relying solely on the science. The police department refused to pay for the expensive testing, so the district attorney's office had to offer up money to pay for it. So it seems like the very first DNA testing was very, very, very basic.
Right.
Kind of maybe done in-house, but was not like very good, if that makes sense.
And you have to remember that juries at this point haven't been trained in the forensic sciences. Nowadays, they almost expect it and are disappointed a lot of times when there's not a lot of forensic evidence. But back then, it's almost like magic science or something that people don't understand it.
Well, yeah, and that'll come up at trial. Life Codes was the foremost DNA lab in the nation, and it happened to be in Valhalla, New York. So these samples were driven to that city where the blood samples could be examined. Investigators felt they needed to make an arrest. There was a lot of pressure. As long as Robert was out on the streets, another young girl could be in danger. There was also the fear of vigilante justice, as the Horton Road neighbors were growing increasingly angry that no one had been arrested. They also worried that Robert might flee. Yet if any arrest was made, the prosecutor would need to quickly present evidence at a preliminary hearing, which they did not have enough yet. They needed to wait some weeks on that DNA evidence. So for 2 weeks, the Golubs had remained elsewhere because, as I mentioned in the first episode, law enforcement had spent 2 weeks combing over the house, like looking for evidence. And normally what would take maybe a day had taken 2 weeks due to the condition of the home.
Right, because of all the clutter and all that stuff.
Right. So finally, law enforcement was able to turn the home back over to the family. Neighbors complained every time they saw John Golub drop by the house to pick up items for his family. Everyone wanted the Golubs banished from the neighborhood. People said, quote, "I don't think they will be welcomed back here. I can't see how they could come back after this." Tension mounted on Saturday, March 18th, when the Golub family returned to their home. The neighbors participated in a vigil across the street from their house. Nearly 75 people gathered, many of them verbalizing their disapproval. 16 days after the murder, Robert left the home at 11:30 a.m., taking a walk to King Cullen, which I think is a grocery store. Nearly 4 dozen people followed behind him.
Oh, wow. So this really does seem like it has the atmosphere of a lynch mob forming.
Oh, you just wait. You haven't heard the last of it. So nearly 4 dozen people are following this young man as he's walking down the street. As he approaches the store, Robert takes off running and the mob pursues him.
Oh.
So he runs into the store. Of course, at this point, he's terrified and panicked. The mob is standing outside chanting "devil" at him.
I understand the frustration of the neighbors and this horrible event happening in their neighborhood, but they're crossing the line at this point.
Oh,
Big time.
Dylan, this will not be the first lines that'll be crossed. Like I said, you just wait.
Gosh, I don't know. I can't say whether or not I would be in the mob.
A few men in the crowd pushed forward, including Kelly's uncle, Robert Player, who confronted the boy. Robert shouted, "I'm innocent. I didn't do it." An officer who had been doing surveillance on the Golub household witnessed the event. He forced his way inside the store between the angry men and Robert. He pulled Robert into a storage area. He was held there until his older sister arrived in the back to pick him up. Law enforcement helped get him into the car, hoping he could make it to safety. But the crowd by then had ran to the back of the store and began pounding fists on top of the car, like demanding his head.
Gosh, I wonder if somebody ran back to the house and got the pitchforks.
Soon after, Elizabeth and her 2 sons fled the house with suitcases. Neighbors who had gathered in the streets cheered and shouted, and about 10 minutes later, John Golub left in a second vehicle. So they're being run out of this neighborhood.
I would not be surprised if somebody doesn't set their house on fire.
It was shocking to see how these people were behaving. Yes, a girl had been savagely murdered in the house, but this group mentality was further scarring children in the neighborhood, and this was no way to honor Kelly's life or memory. It was an emotionally charged situation, and people just were not thinking clearly. Later, someone set off fireworks inside the Golub house.
Oh.
So as you mentioned, you're surprised the house didn't burn down. Someone may have tried.
That sounds like an attempt to me.
John Golub told reporters, quote, "I thought we had some friends here, but I guess we don't. We will have to move from here, but I'm going to move when this is settled." The case would go before a grand jury. Law enforcement decided to, quote, "go after the older brother." Although it was very likely that John Jay had let Kelly inside the house, that didn't make him a murderer. None of the forensic evidence placed him in the basement. He also had an alibi for the hours that police believed this crime had taken place.
Yeah, but Kelly coming over there to hang out was something that never happened before, right?
Right.
So I kind of wonder if he was not involved in some manner, at least to lure her in the house.
Kelly's father was not happy with this decision. He believed John Jay should also be facing charges. On March 22nd, the grand jury convened. It was an unusual grand jury in which many witnesses were called to the stand, including law enforcement, the medical examiner, and various forensic folks. Even members of the Tenya's family were called to the stand. It was almost like a mock trial instead of a grand jury hearing. It didn't take long for the grand jury to indict Robert Golub for Kelly's murder. Now, at the time, New York had no death penalty. The maximum offense for which Robert could be indicted was second-degree murder. An arrest warrant was issued, and word quickly leaked that Robert was under surveillance. Officers were ordered to arrest him as soon as possible. On the day of the grand jury, Robert had gone to Manhattan to visit his older sister Adele. Police could not locate him. It took until the next day to find Robert, and by then his attorney had called to say that he would just turn himself in. All the while, Robert kept saying, "I didn't do it. I didn't do it." Neighbors were relieved. Many suspected it had been Robert all along. His friends from high school days were in disbelief. Most of them felt Robert was incapable of committing such a horrific crime.
So the people that knew him, you think they just couldn't admit it to themselves, or they really thought it wasn't possible for him to go that far?
Maybe both.
Yeah.
None of us want to admit or acknowledge that our close friend could be capable of such damage to another person.
Right, that's true.
I don't think any of us want to wrap our heads around that. I mean, if someone came to me and said you had committed this kind of atrocious crime where you had gutted a teenage girl, I would be like, are you kidding? There's no way. Dylan would never do that.
No. But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that's just a inclination people have.
Yeah, I think people just don't want to think about it, and also probably don't want to admit, like you said, that they would be friends or have misjudged someone's character so severely. When Robert was taken in for his first hearing, the building swarmed with about 200 to 300 reporters.
That seems like a lot of reporters.
You could barely get through the courthouse or maneuver into this courtroom. Robert entered a not guilty plea. He was ordered into custody while awaiting trial and was eventually moved into isolation for his own safety. It seems perhaps the other inmates did not care for what he had allegedly done.
Well, and that shows you the shocking how bad it was, this crime, and the shocking nature of it. Even other criminals are kind of
Appalled
by it. Yes.
Yes. Then Newsday published a bombshell report. Robert had taken a mail-order taxidermy class which taught him how to gut and dress a deer. This explained the gruesome incisions on Kelly's body, according to law enforcement.
Whoa, back up. Mail-order taxidermy class?
Yes.
Wow. I didn't know there was such a thing.
Well, it doesn't really surprise me because back in the day, there was a lot of that like mail order courses type of thing.
Right.
And so, yeah, I guess it doesn't really surprise me that one could take a taxidermy class.
Is that something you might find in the back of a magazine
like a
or
correspondence school? Probably. The news report suggested that Robert had tried to skin Kelly like a dead trophy animal. Maybe he just liked reading about Jack the Ripper.
Well, and this is yellow journalism. Let's be honest. They're taking a shocking, brutal crime and they're running with it. They're embellishing. They're trying to come up with a new angle.
Well, yeah, but I think it does explain to an extent. I mean, the level of injury to Kelly's body.
Well, I guess
because
so.
I think at first law enforcement was just like, "What is this?" But once you find out he's gone through this taxidermy class, I mean, it sounds very much like he was applying some of those techniques to a human body.
Or at least attempting to.
Law enforcement felt it was part of a larger plan to dismember Kelly's body for easy removal from the house. After Robert's first rush of adrenaline with committing the murder, law enforcement felt he likely grew tired or disgusted, unable to finish. At that point, he probably decided to hide Kelly in the sleeping bag, and they felt this also explained. Robert said he was sleeping, napping like the whole evening. That's probably why he was exhausted from exerting the kind of energy it would take to brutally beat someone and then make these kind of cut marks and incisions.
So he was exhausted from having done this horrible thing.
Yeah. When Robert was arraigned, his original attorney bowed out of the case. He was appointed a lawyer named John Lewis. Prosecutors knew there was no smoking gun to this case. They would need to build the case around circumstantial evidence. Key to the case would be the DNA tests of the various blood samples taken from the house. By 1989, DNA had been used in about 2,000 criminal cases. The second piece of evidence was the palm print lifted from the closet molding. Now, the FBI had confirmed it belonged to Robert. Yet, palm prints are much more tricky to use in court than fingerprints because palm prints are not based on, like, sort of the individual characters that you get from fingerprints.
Really?
Palm prints are more based on folds of the skin.
Well, like the lines on your hands, right? I mean, would that be... Because I have to imagine that that's rather distinct by person.
Well, according to these folks, it's not the same, Dylan. You're asking me like I'm some sort of forensic specialist.
I just can't believe you're not a fingerprint and a palm print expert at this point.
Are you?
No.
What do you contribute?
Well, I'm saying I need you to tell me so I can say something dumb about it.
See, I knew this was going to be the kind of day we would have.
So at this point, palm prints, they're not as, what would the word
reliable,
be? Not as reliable or spot on?
Yeah.
Okay.
When the Golubs returned home, it made things awkward. So they fled, and now they've returned again.
My gosh.
On the first night, John Jay was back in the house. Someone shot a pellet gun through his bathroom window. The Golubs sent their youngest son to boarding school after this.
So I must say, I kind of feel for the Golub parents in this situation because they had nothing to do with it, as far as I know. And they're kind of just been thrust into this horrible situation as well, where their entire life's been upended.
Yes. But I think as time goes on, you might change your conclusion of these people.
Oh, my God.
We'll see. We'll see. A court order was issued to collect imprints of Robert's teeth to see if they match the bite marks on Kelly's body. Of course, his attorney is trying to get him released from jail. A judge set his bail at $5 million.
Wow.
Yeah. So they don't want him out. Robert had made statements to law enforcement that Kelly and John Jay were an item. He could see it in their eyes, he said. Kelly had called the Golub home several times for John Jay, according to Robert. However, telephone records revealed there had been no phone calls placed between the households, and especially from the Tenya's residence. No one from the Tenya's house had ever called the Golub house.
So that's not true at all.
So he's lying.
Or at least it wasn't from that house to there.
Robert also denied knowing anything about the bayonet, but multiple witnesses had seen him with the weapon, saying he had bragged about it and liked to flash it to people. I just think you're going to see there's a lot of inconsistencies in Robert's truth versus reality.
Okay.
He maybe is not the most forthright individual. Robert's attorneys argued that the police had used brute force during the interrogation. And of course, there's no evidence of this. After this, Robert had an outburst shouting at the judge that, quote, police had done other things to him.
Oh God. What does that even mean?
I'm not sure. The trial was set for October of 1989. John Lewis, the defense attorney, wanted to push the trial back, saying he wasn't ready. The judge reminded him that he had had 9 weeks to prepare. Lewis asked to be relieved from the case, so another attorney was assigned to defend Robert. He was given until January of 1990 to prepare for the trial.
So the other lawyer just was like, he was over it, right?
It seems like maybe that was the case. John Golub had been hounding detectives about his collection of watches in the basement. I mean, he was all but accusing the detectives of having taken the watches during their search of the basement. But it was learned that Robert had pawned them the day before the murder.
So his dad thinks the cops maybe stole from them, but it was really his son.
Yes. Opening arguments began on February 15th of 1990. Phone records were entered as evidence, showing a call was placed that Friday afternoon from the Golub house to the Tenya's residence, lasting about 55 seconds. A scale model of the Golub home was used to demonstrate to jurors how a murder could occur in the basement without anyone hearing upstairs, especially if loud music was playing. The selection of photographs for the trial had to be made carefully. The most graphic images were omitted to avoid inflaming the jury against the accused. Now, Dylan, I've heard this happens in trials quite a bit. Most recently comes to mind the Evelyn Boswell trial, where they excluded some of the most graphic photos.
Now, is that where her remains were found out in that shed with all her belongings?
Yes.
Yeah, and she was wrapped up in tinfoil or something like that?
And placed head first in a trash can. I mean, it was horrible. But the judge ruled that those images could not be shown in court.
Because they might prejudice the jury.
Yes. How do you feel about this?
Well, it's evidence.
That's how I feel.
That's the way I look at it. But I guess you have to give that some thought, because at a certain point, I guess you could consider the images so horrible that it could cloud the judgment of the jury towards that person. If they are truly innocent, they see these images and they're just so enraged, want someone to pay for it, that they stop listening to evidence and following the law and things like that. I mean, I get where they're coming from, but at the end of the day, I think it's evidence. I
disagree with it, because I think the jury should know the graphic nature of what happened. The jury should see those images
So
because it tells the story. It paints a picture.
right.
I don't know. That's just my opinion, I guess.
Like I said, I agree with you that it is just evidence and it needs to be all presented. But I understand from the other side what the argument against it is.
Yeah, well, tell your client not to murder somebody. Now, during cross-examination from the serologist, Robert turned to his parents and started smiling.
That's not weird.
A spectator shouted, "Turn around," and someone else shouted, "Animal." There were more than a few outbursts in the courtroom since the start of the trial process. At one point earlier, like in the preliminary stages, Mrs. Teniers had to be escorted out of the courtroom after Robert mouthed an obscenity at her. And of course, this kind of sent her into a full-on rage. Yeah, I mean, so things are not good. I mean, there's a lot of spectators here who are going to have outbursts.
Yeah, and that's a tricky situation, but I think that's on the judge to handle those early on with a very heavy hand, I have to say. Threat of contempt or even having someone, taken out in handcuffs, if you will, to kind of let everybody know that this type of thing's not going to be tolerated because though you're emotional and angry, you can actually affect the trial negatively and give that person like a second chance at a retrial or something.
Well,
so you got to be very careful with that.
Well, on this first day during the lunch break, a shouting match broke out in the corridor between the Teniers family and their supporters. The Golubs screamed back. The Golubs had complained 15 times to law enforcement about the harassment they were experiencing while living on Horton Road in the aftermath of the murder. Adele Golub said, "Why don't they leave us alone and just let the trial be the issue?" Robert Teniers responded, "They are harassing us by being at the trial. Maybe they ought to move away."
Okay.
This is very heated. I mean, there's a lot of emotions at play here.
Which is understandable. I mean, seriously.
Robert's lawyer had also been receiving death threats. He had a 13-year-old daughter the same age as Kelly, and he had to remove her from school for her safety.
Well, that's going way too far.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just trying to do his job, though I don't know how some defense attorneys do it. Sometimes you can't do that type of thing. You can't threaten them and their family. That's ridiculous.
Just wait. You've not heard the last of this, Dylan.
Gosh, this is pre-internet. These people's doing all this shit in person.
The blood evidence that matched Robert was found on Kelly's bomber jacket and a tablecloth, and these were also presented at trial. Despite the fact that it was damning evidence, Robert seemed confident and was described as acting hyper, like throughout the whole trial. Like he couldn't sit still. He would shuffle papers. He would be doodling. He would whisper to his lawyer.
So he's very animated.
He would ask his lawyer for gum or breath mints. Like he just seemed like he couldn't just sit still. He smiled a great deal.
Which is not good. It's not a good look when you're at the defendant's table.
He would like high five his parents or make like thumbs ups, at his parents.
It's going good, Mom.
Look, Ma. Are you proud of me, Mom and Dad?
I'll pick this table up. You want me to pick this table up?
Robert's attorney tried repeatedly to bar the DNA reports from the trial. Again, DNA testing was barely a decade old and had only been used in criminal trials for about 2 years. DNA evidence showed that Robert's blood was mixed with Kelly's blood atop the attaché case in the basement and on this tablecloth. There was no question that the blood found in the basement belonged to Robert Golub and Kelly Teniers. For someone who'd claimed they had not been in the basement with Kelly, I mean, this was pretty impactful.
Well, yeah, their blood mixed together. I mean, that's a pretty damning piece of evidence.
The forensic expert from Life Codes, her name was McNally, she said, quote, "The likelihood of seeing that pattern in the random population is 1 in 707 million.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So I think that Robert's a match. The closing arguments from the prosecution asked the jurors who hit her, who ripped her clothes from her, who mutilated her, and who stuffed her into the sleeping bag. The DA told the jury there were only 4 suspects: John Jay, Glenn McMahon, and Steve Baton, the 2 friends, which I found out my book I used as a resource had given them fake names, but these are their real names, which I found for part 2.
Oh, damn. Damn, they just got outed here on Mountain Murders.
Yeah, we know about you, Glenn
Yeah, Glenn.
and Steve
Well, look,
and Robert.
we don't think Glenn and Steve had anything to do with this, folks. Allegedly.
No, but just because your name is Glenn, I want to kick you in the knee. And then there also was not one shred of evidence to indicate anyone other than Robert had been in the basement near the crime scene. So the DA, of course, is reinforcing that.
So there's no other bloody handprint or palm prints?
No.
Just Robert's?
No one's blood has intermingled with Kelly the way Robert's has. Altogether, the jurors deliberated for only 8 hours before reaching a decision. What do you think?
They found him guilty.
Guilty!
2nd-degree murder?
Yes.
Damn, how is it 2nd degree?
Later, a juror will say, quote, "The lack of motive didn't change the facts or evidence." Another will say she watched Robert closely during the trial and that his demeanor never changed. He showed no remorse, no emotion. The juror said, quote, "It was kind of strange." When the verdict was read, once again, no emotion appeared on Robert's face. But the courtroom erupted. The judge had to clear everyone out because of the cheers and the shouting.
Right.
And the threats to the family, to the Golub family. It was chaotic. John Golub thought he was having a heart attack, and they had to take him into the judge's chambers for observation. Elizabeth Golub cried hysterically, and she also had to be, removed and sent into the judge's chambers. Richard Tenious suddenly realized that the guilty verdict was not going to bring his daughter back. He stormed out of the courtroom and allegedly kicked over some kind of display that was in the hallway at the courthouse.
So everyone's emotions are peaking.
Yes. Reporters swirled around the family. Kelly's grandfather said, quote, "I don't want to talk to the Golubs. They're dirt to me." Back on Horton Road, many of the neighbors were waiting to hear this verdict. There was also a heavy police presence at the time in anticipation of what news might come out. When the verdict was announced on television, residents spilled out onto the street and they were relishing in Robert's guilty verdict. A banner was displayed on a highway overpass that read, "Death to Golub."
Damn. Who the hell took the time to make the banner? They were ready.
The Tenious family spent the night with relatives and did not return to their home on Horton Road. When the Golub family arrived at their house late that night, John told reporters the family had no choice but to stay in the house since they could not afford to move. Neighbors wanted the family gone. They repeatedly told the media, quote, "They're not welcome here." John Golub told reporters the next day, quote, "They're not going to convince me of Robert's guilt until my son tells me himself."
Well, and I mean, as a parent, you don't want to admit that. We've said it many times. You don't want to admit your child's capable of that. But I got to say, I'm a very rather logic-based being.
I was going to say, I'm a pretty logical-based person. And even if I didn't want to acknowledge that my child did this, I'm still going to accept it. Especially when you're presenting me with hard evidence.
Blood evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about you? I mean, is that what you were going to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, I understand the not wanting your son to be guilty of it and being in denial, but I don't think I could convince myself otherwise.
It had proven easier for the Golubs to believe that some masked bandit had broken into their home, lured a child over into their basement, killed her, and then escaped through a window, than to accept their son had murdered Kelly Tenious. The neighborhood feud between the Golub and Tenious family continued. The Golub family's lawyer wrote a letter to the district attorney regarding the violence and harassment the family had experienced. John went on Inside Edition complaining about the neighbor's behavior and stating how an intruder had murdered Kelly in the family's basement.
Still.
I guess in retaliation, the Tenious family appeared on Geraldo. You love Geraldo, don't you?
I had some good shows back in the day.
Richard said John Golub, quote, actually came out onto his front porch with other neighbors present and told me that I killed Kelly and put her in his basement.
Damn.
John denied ever saying it, but admitted, quote, he had heard the rumor that Kelly's father had murdered her and then stuffed her into a sleeping bag in the neighbor's basement.
In this cluttered basement.
Does that track at all in your
that there's
brain?
No evidence or witnesses ever saying that any member of the family had ever been over at the Golubs.
On June 1st, Robert was taken to court for sentencing. The court had received more than 1,000 letters with 4,000 signatures urging that the maximum sentence of life in prison be imposed. Judge Goodman read every letter.
Damn.
Robert had been angry for weeks that he had not testified in his own defense. He kept telling his parents, quote, I knew I should have went on the stand.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have performed very good, very, very well.
When Robert addressed the court, he said, quote, I did not kill Kelly Tenias. Who called Kelly from the upstairs phone in my home? Now, this was the first time anyone suggested the upstairs telephone had been used to call Kelly. I mean, it's almost like an admission or revealing a detail that no one knew.
Right.
Because what would make him say someone had used the upstairs phone?
That's kind of weird.
You don't know which phone in the home had been used. He accused the police of evidence tampering. Now, this is during his sentencing where he is allowed to address the court. He accuses the police of evidence tampering, the court of misconduct, how they refused to move the trial, and he went on to say the jury acted with impropriety, though he didn't actually give any actual evidence or information about it.
So
just accusations.
Had the defense sought a change of venue at some point for the trial?
I believe so, just because of the media frenzy.
Well, yeah. Yeah, so that wouldn't surprise me.
In his version, Robert had been the victim of a massive conspiracy. He went on to say the forensic DNA evidence had been a gross, misleading lie.
Okay.
The system is working against him.
They're all doing this just to get him to move out of his parents' house.
They want him to get a job. The judge ordered Robert to serve life in prison with a mandatory 25 years before he could possibly be eligible for parole. That was the longest sentence that New York permitted at the time. A few days after the sentencing, John accepted $5,000 to go on a current affair. The Tenias family was disgusted to learn the Golubs were making money off of Kelly's murder. The show also aired an interview with Robert, who was confident the conviction would be reversed on appeal. He said, quote, a very nice girl from my neighborhood is dead, but I'm just not responsible. I'm doing everything I can to prove I'm innocent. Hopefully the right person will be brought to justice.
So this story must have been really sensational when it happened.
It absolutely was.
For them to make all those TV appearances even before and after, the sentencing.
Vicky Tenias was charged with harassment against Elizabeth after she drove her car in the woman's direction. A witness corroborated the story. She was arraigned 3 weeks later. A judge scolded Victoria and told her that she had to stay away from the Golub family. The prosecutor had 35 complaints of harassment, 20 from the Golubs and 15 from the Tenias family. Because again, there's just this ongoing back and forth feud even after the guilty verdict and the sentencing. It just continues. It's like the Hatfields and McCoys.
Right.
Then in a strange twist of fate, it was determined that the witness who had seen Mrs. Tenias try to drive over Elizabeth or run her over or hit her with a car.
She drove in her direction.
Yes. That the witness had actually been a friend of Robert's and was a member of John's yacht club. All complaints were turned over to a grand jury for investigation. The constant warring between the families had reached kind of a pinnacle. Neighbors were tired of it. They complained that they weren't able to sell their houses and move away because of what was going on in the neighborhood.
Be like, don't mind them. They're in a blood feud.
Yes.
The one family's daughter was murdered, but it's no big deal.
Now, in December, the charges against Victoria were finally dropped. The Tenias family had cooperated with the grand jury investigation, but Elizabeth refused to testify unless her family was granted immunity.
Okay.
In the end, it seemed the feud between the families overshadowed that Kelly Ann Tenias had been murdered. It was a classic sexual sadistic mutilation. Perpetrators of this type of crime hold the impulse for years and often find release through drugs and alcohol, which seemed to kind of fit with Robert. Later, John Golub allegedly rammed his car into the back of Richard Tenias' pickup truck while Richard was driving his son. At his trial, John admitted that he had thrown rocks at Vicky and had yelled obscenities at her. He ended up being acquitted of the charges after he stated that he was afraid of the Tenias family.
Okay.
So they're just like wasting court resources back and forth.
Yeah.
Victoria sued the Golub family for $5 million for false arrest. And then they brought another lawsuit against the Golubs for like failing to control their children.
Almost like a wrongful death kind of
Yeah. In June of 1993, John Golub claimed Vicky had sprayed his car with a water hose.
Come on, people. I mean, damn.
I told you, it just keeps getting worse. Victoria alleged John had driven onto her lawn and tried to run her over. Both cases were dismissed due to a lack of evidence. Though John Golub insisted his son was innocent, he only visited Robert once in the first 3 years of his incarceration.
So either he really, it doesn't, maybe he just doesn't like him, right?
Okay.
And just because he's in jail is not going to change that I like you.
Yeah.
I don't like you.
In October of 2009, John and Elizabeth finally moved from Horton Road. The house was sold to a single mother. So 1989 to 2009.
What the hell?
It took all that time for this family to finally move.
20 years?
Yeah. The trial was the first case in New York State to have won by using DNA evidence. In November of 2013, Robert finally admitted responsibility for Kelly's death for the first time. He stated he had accidentally knocked Kelly down the stairs, causing her to black out. He then proceeded to beat and stab her to death.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because he was afraid that he would get into trouble.
You accidentally...
For knocking her down the stairs.
There was an accident.
Or for the accident, yeah.
So then you decided to beat and mutilate her body just because.
The only motive Robert had offered up was that he had been on steroids at the time. Now, he's been up for parole several times and has continuously been denied. The Tenias family pushed for the new district attorney, Kathleen Rice, to reopen the case against John Jay as an accomplice in 2006. The Tenias family believed John Jay made the phone call to Kelly and opened the door, letting her inside the house on the day she was murdered, that he had essentially, lured her there.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
And he was being such a little shit, when it first happened.
People, of course, then people are re-questioned, the case is re-examined, folks are re-interviewed. And that's when Stephen Glenn, John Jay's friends, told authorities they were not even close with John Jay, but had accepted the offer to ride the school bus to his house and smoke pot on March 3rd, 1989, and that was sort of like an out-of-the-ordinary thing because they weren't even really friends with him.
Oh.
And this is when they're adults. Now, according to these friends, John Jay left the room 3 different times, and they believed it was during one of these moments that the phone call had been placed to Kelly's house. John Jay was considered the neighborhood bully, and no one wanted to go to the Golub house because it was dirty and he was considered an asshole. Kelly had been the only kid in the neighborhood who could bring out a bit of a nice guy in John. So the friends were kind of like, yeah, we think he probably did get her to come over.
Damn.
John Jay had not stayed away from trouble either, Dylan. In the late 1990s, he was arrested on drug charges in Nassau County. He was also sued by 3 employees at a New Jersey's Hooters, where he was the manager, for sexual discrimination and harassment. He offered the 3 women better shifts in exchange for sexual favors.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the first Hooters manager to do that.
For the DA to officially reopen the case, she needed either John Jay to confess or she needed some kind of solid eyewitness. She had nothing new. Therefore, she couldn't really like officially reopen this case after 20 years, but she did, try to look into it for the Tenias family.
Damn. What a crazy story.
It is a crazy story. And I gave you kind of the lightest version of this feud back and forth between these families.
Well, yeah.
It was ongoing. And not only were the Tenias and the Golubs fighting, but you also had neighbors participating as well, throwing bricks into the yard, throwing rocks at the houses, kids in the neighborhood, like spitting on the Golubs' cars, throwing rocks at them.
Now, was it mostly the neighborhood against the Golubs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It was mostly the residents of Horton Road against this family.
Damn.
Which I think is wrong because, I mean, they didn't play a part in the murder. They, are kind of like victims of this themselves.
Right.
Because they didn't commit the crime, but now, they're being scrutinized when it was their son that did it. But I also can see the other side of it, that these people are very upset and angry and emotional, and people in the neighborhood don't want this family living there, especially if they believe that John Jay also played a role in this murder.
Right. Now, I mean, I understand.
And the fact that the family keeps saying it was some sort of like,
it was
like a ninja who broke in, and
it was more likely her dad killing her and stuffing her in my basement than my son.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's pretty gross to say.
I'm going to tell you, Robert, with the kind of brutal porn and stuff he was known to watch, and I think the justice system has done right by denying his parole. I think he has problems.
I agree.
And I think he would have certainly, reoffended. I think he has urges.
I think he does as well. I think he is like some kind of sexual sadist.
Right.
And a danger to society. But I also think his brother has some problems too.
Yeah, me too.
Because who harasses women at their workplace enough that a lawsuit is brought against him?
Who lets a guy named John Jay become a manager at Hooters?
Well, does that surprise you that a guy named John Jay would be the manager at the Hooters?
No, not really.
No. It's just such a wild story. And you really do feel this family's pain, the Tenias family.
It's horrible.
I mean, what they have gone through, and then this continuous reminder every time they look out the window and see the house where their daughter was killed.
Yeah, see that.
Or see this family seemingly like living their lives and denying their son's guilt.
Yeah.
Knowing good and damn well he did it.
That made it very unique in that aspect. The proximity to the crime scene, just right next door, the family, the other neighbor family being right there. That's really tough. And honestly, I think the best thing that could happen in that is for them to have been able to maybe move away, just to get away from that, knowing that your daughter was brutalized. It just keeps it raw. It keeps the wound raw. I know you're never going to be okay, but at least with time it fades and gets maybe a little easier to deal with. But there's no way in those circumstances, and I think that's why this feud continued like it did.
I agree. But, you have to consider that the Tenias family, I mean, they moved to this neighborhood originally to move in with the grandparents who were elderly and sick. So I'm sure at that point, maybe it wasn't convenient to relocate. They still had to care for the aging parents.
Well, and maybe that was a long-time family home.
I was going to say, and on top of it, I mean, there was probably like, this familial connection to this house. And it was a house Richard had grown up in. And I'm sure there was like this sentimental feeling of not wanting to leave that house. And maybe, they had put everything kind of into moving into this house and taking care of their parents. And maybe they financially couldn't afford to move.
Well, and it's easy for me to say you should just move.
Well, and maybe they felt like we shouldn't have to move.
Right.
This is our home. Y'all move. Nobody wants you here.
But I couldn't move tomorrow if I needed to, right?
No.
So it really is not, it's easier said than done.
Yeah. I mean, they don't own a home to sell, And on top of it, I mean, who does want to move to a neighborhood where there is a murder house?
Apparently a single mom.
Well, yeah, but that's only like 20 years after the fact.
Right.
20 years later, you can consider somebody wants to move next to like the Amityville house. But for the most part, right after a horrific murder takes place, people usually aren't trying to move into that neighborhood or move into the murder house, move next door to the murder house.
No. I mean, would it give you pause?
Probably. I mean, it depends on the crime, but yeah, maybe. Especially if I considered that their younger son was also involved. If I truly believed that and he's out free, I would be like, I'm not moving to that neighborhood.
Yeah. I think that would be the deciding factor for me.
All right, Dylan. Well, thank you so much for sitting down to discuss this case with me today and wrap up part 2. The book I used as my main resource for this case is called Against Her Will by Ronald J. Watkins. There's also multiple newspaper articles out there, and a lot of other true crime cases have covered Kelly's story, or true crime podcasts have covered Kelly's story. Yeah.
Have you heard the first rumors and news coming out of the Diddy courtroom trial?
Well, I've heard some things.
What have you heard?
Well, I heard that in the opening statements, I believe the prosecution has claimed that Diddy forced Cassie to drink urine from a prostitute that had peed in her mouth, which brings a whole new meaning to the name P. Diddy.
Damn, I haven't heard that. What?
Yeah.
Okay, see, for one, your first mistake is being in a position where a prostitute can pee in your mouth. Okay, that's number one first mistake.
Well, you have to realize, Dylan, I mean, I know you're kind of making light of the situation, but Cassie was very young when she got with him.
She was young and abused and
she was
beat down.
Like 18, 19 years old. He's much older than her. He's powerful. He's rich.
I think he was quite a bit more scary than people realize,
yeah,
too.
I mean, and he's beating her ass all the time.
He's kind of a big guy,
She's afraid to I mean, she feels like she has to go along with it.
She's
and
16.
He's plying her with drugs.
Right.
And forcing her to participate in these freak-offs.
He's a piece of shit.
I know in the opening statements, not only was there the pee story, but also how Diddy forced her to have sex with male escorts while he filmed and watched. And when she demanded there be condoms involved, Diddy refused and would just make her have sex with these people.
So yeah, they're saying he's pouring the charm on.
Oh, okay.
He's being very cordial. There was a pregnant, I'm not sure if she was on staff, but there was a pregnant woman near him, and he could be seen looking and mouthing, "Are you good?" Words to her like, "Are you comfortable? Are you okay?" So he's really trying to pour on the Diddy charm that I think he's hidden behind. For many of these years, he's been doing this horrible shit behind closed doors.
Well, I know the defense is also their main point in this case is not to prosecute Diddy just based on his sexual proclivities, and that people involved were actively involved and consenting to these freak-offs. And so they, the public and the jury shouldn't allow these salacious stories to cloud the truth just because Diddy's a freak.
And he
wants to watch people pee in each other's mouths, which...
Hey, look, if that's what you want to watch, fine. But everybody, the mouth and the pee, the urethra, they all have to be consenting. Okay? You can't force any of that. That's where the problem comes in. And I think they're also going to go with the fact there was a lot of drugs.
Yes.
Around these freak-offs, and that Diddy was on the drugs as well. So, and I guess, maybe say he can't be held to, responsibility for all his actions while under the influence of these heavy narcotics.
Well, guess what? Narcotics are illegal and you shouldn't be under the influence of them, bud. You shouldn't be having them flown in by the fucking boatloads or truckloads or plane loads of fucking drugs.
I'm still not even sure for one, I've heard this before. When did people start doing the date rape drug recreationally?
Beats me? I don't know.
Was it GHB?
I'm a complete square. I don't know anything about drugs.
I'm saying, who in the world would want to take this drug that from all descriptions is a horrible, you're kind of like this helpless, euphoric state, and then maybe you don't, you kind of black out
yeah.
and don't remember everything. I mean, who would want to do that?
Well, that sounds like heroin too. I don't understand. I mean, when I've seen these documentaries with people who were addicted to heroin and they shoot up and then they like pass out in a squalor, nasty ass abandoned shack with like rats crawling around, and they're like laying on some dirty mattress that has like shit stains on it.
Talking about it makes me feel good.
And they're just laying there for like 3 days, completely passed out. I'm like, why would you do that? Like, why would you want to do that? But then again, I don't know, because I've never in my life had a desire to do these things.
No, so I'm sure there'll be a lot more to come from that. That's shocking. Cassie's recounting of some of this is horrible. And I don't think he's going to make it out of this.
I hope he doesn't.
I don't think there's any way.
I really feel like they're going to slam dunk his ass.
I think the best that the defense is hoping for at this point is to try to minimize the damage to their client, and try to minimize his time in jail and work out some kind of a deal, maybe, because maybe it's too late for a deal. They're at trial, but anyway. Yeah, I think they're just trying to get the best outcome for him. I don't think there's any way they think they can get a not guilty. Is it like 200 charges or some shit?
I almost feel like in some of these cases, the defense relies on the celebrity factor.
See, if I was a juror on
that,
the panel,
that like, oh, well, he's this celebrity and, he's friends with all these celebrities, and they somehow think that's going to like schmooze a jury to like not convict because, well, but it's P. Diddy.
See, the problem.
It's P. Diddy who produced those really shitty songs. Like, I'll be missing you.
That was such a dark time in hip hop. Yeah, directly after when Biggie and Pac were killed, the some of the stuff that came out right behind, kind of to fill that void, it was rough. And I really think is what led us to hear Cat started singing and shit and rap, and it just really went down a bad road. And now we have mumble rap where they literally just
say things that
just
don't
say
make
words
sense.
that don't even rhyme or have any relation. There's not even similes, or it's just not the same. It's
You mean like the one song that's on the radio where the guy talks about he wants mo chicken,
Yeah.
and he's fat and he wants to eat some chicken?
I think it's called Mo Chickens, the name of the song. It's terrible. But anyway, celebrities aren't what they used to. They don't have the same value to society as they used to. And I never got it. I never cared about who was dating who, or pictures of them just at the grocery store. I don't care about that stuff. I never have. I can go enjoy a music, movie, whatever, entertainment, and really like it. And that's as far as it goes with me. I never look behind the scenes, but some people love that. But, celebrities don't carry the same clout nowadays. And I think it's because, what does it mean to be famous, right? Back when we were younger, it meant a certain thing. Like there are only a handful of people made it through, to be famous in all the different arenas, music, entertainment, whatever.
Well, it just seems like at one point you did have to have some talent to get
there's
there.
that.
And I think today people are just so exhausted with celebrity culture and worship. These people are making millions and millions of dollars while the rest of us are struggling to buy gas or buy eggs or pay the rent. And then you have these people who seem to be completely talentless, getting paid millions for doing nothing. You have some tone deaf person like Katy Perry going to space and like floating and like, I'm an astronaut now. Woo! I mean, what next? Is she going to pick up a rock and call herself a geologist?
She could stare at it in the camera.
People are just over it.
Well, and
they're
then
just so fucking over it. And I think the veil has been lifted and people are realizing that these celebrities, a lot of them are just big pieces of shit.
Yeah, and then on the other part of that, and I'll wrap it up, is the internet celebrities. You see what I'm saying? It's just regular everyday people
Oh, you mean like the influencers?
Well, the people who
and the
get clout
content
and famous, and
creators?
some of these people were making $10 million a month. I mean, it's ridiculous what some of these streamers are making, some of these influencers are making, brand deals and all that shit, and they're just regular folks. You know what I mean? So it's really, it doesn't have the same. And I agree with what you're saying. When the economy was good, people had good jobs, you know, and had comfortable lives. I think maybe they viewed celebrities in a little bit of a different light. It's a little easier to be like, oh, celebrity worship, if you will, if you're comfortable, than opposed to if you're fighting every day just to, you know, keep the bills paid.
Well, that, and again, I just hear a lot of banter back and forth on social media and whatever, where people, I think, are also just tired of the no talent. Like, you got a bunch of hacks who suck, can't act their way out of a fucking paper bag. They're the worst, getting cast over and over and over in these fucking terrible movies that nobody wants to watch, and they're flops at the box office. And
Terrible.
people are just like, what?
Like,
This is what you have to offer? Like, you go from someone like Cary Grant to this Duber?
But it's the whole system's flawed, right? Because we just went and saw The Accountant 2.
Yes.
And beforehand, I asked
We
Heather.
watched the first Accountant.
Right. Like
As
the
a
night
refresher.
Yeah, the night before, watched the first Accountant. Heather couldn't quite remember parts of it. She was like, okay. We watched it. She's like, well, that was pretty good. You know, it's kind of edgy, kind of having a dark.
Yeah, had like a dark tone.
It was gritty.
Yeah.
It was very minimalist in ways that really worked. Oh, so we were so ready. We got, you know, Ben Affleck and what's the other dude?
Bernthal.
Bernthal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, both brothers, you know, boom. This is going to be hardcore. This movie was surprisingly ridiculous.
It was like a complete 180 from the first film. It tried to be like
A bro
some sort of
comedy.
edgy bro comedy, and it was fucking terrible.
It was terrible. Ben Affleck was really trying extra hard to like create this character that was quite different than his portrayal in the first Accountant. It was I don't know what he was trying to do.
Well, in the first Accountant, he had very minimal dialogue, which makes sense that, okay, you have this man that's on the spectrum.
He's basically nonverbal.
He doesn't communicate a whole lot. Like, this makes sense. To the second film, where they're trying to make him more social and like come out of his shell, and it's terrible. And Ben Affleck's like almost speaking in like a robot voice, like, I am going to line dance, and
No,
I'm like,
it was
what are you doing, bud?
It was a robot voice with like a sling blade face. It was horrible, guys.
It was so
Folks,
fucking bad.
don't
And then
do
they've got
it.
him wearing like khakis and New Balance tennis shoes, like he's dressing in like this dad casual or something, which was completely different from the first.
Yeah.
Just the whole thing. I was like, what are y'all doing?
In the first,
And then Bernthal just keeps making all these like corny jokes, and there's like all these jokes about him with this cat, and it's just silly. It was silly.
I don't know what it was.
So again, I think people like are just fucking over it. Like, can you not give us something that's not just a literal piece of shit on a plate and then expect me to pay like $16 to go see this piece of shit?
Yeah, and we were in a theater with two other people on a Saturday night.
Nobody wants to go to the movies.
Week 2 of The Accountant.
Nobody wants to pay $75 to see a movie that's bad. End rant.
in an uncomfortable aging theater
Oh
that
my
was built
God,
in the 90s.
that chair, every time we go, my ass hurts for like 3 days after. It's the worst seat ever. I don't know why we keep going to that theater.
It's because it's the only
one. Yeah.
Okay.
Enough. End rant.
All right. So until next time, we'll see you guys in the midweek. We'll see y'all in the midweek. And until then,
I hope somebody shits in Diddy's mouth.
yeah, I hope somebody shits in Diddy's mouth, but they wouldn't even have to make him.
I was going to say he'd probably be into it.
They wouldn't have to make him accept it into his mouth. He'd be like, ah.
Yeah. It's like soft serve.
Shit on
Spoon
Diddy.
it in.
Shit on Diddy, daddy. Ah. All right.
Fucking gross. Okay.
All right.
We'll be back with a midweek soon. Bye.
Bye.